morning, class. Before we start, let us all stand as we ask for the grace and guidance of our God. Who can lead the prayer? Go ahead and let's have a prayer first. How are you feeling today, class? That's good to hear that you're feeling great. Now, who are the absents for today, class? Class secretary? No one? Very good. Now, I need 4 students to go here in front of me to do the message relay. So, as what have you observed, class, while they are doing the activity a while ago, what have you noticed? Yes, Mohammad, what have you noticed? Okay, you have a point. You notice that they are communicating through relaying a message or information from sender to receiver. Now, let me ask you a question. Why communication is important and why do we need to communicate? Anyone? Very good. Communication is very important in our everyday life because it allows us to connect with other people and to share ideas, thoughts, and to build relationships. So, before we start our proper discussion, now who can tell me what was our last topic? Yes? Halus? Right. Our last topic is all about the types of sentences such as imperative, declarative, interrogative, and exclamatory sentence. Now, who can read the objectives of the day? Go ahead, Apostle. Alright, class. Now, let's move on to group activity. This is called Guess Message. So, I will divide you into 4 groups. This row will be group 1, this row will be group 2, this row will be group 3, and 4. Now, each group must have 1 representatives, and the instructions are, I have here pictures, and the representatives will guess the pictures or will act of what the picture says, and by using body language or sign language, and their groups must be guess of what the message or information conveys. Are we clear now, class? Alright. If whose group will get many points, there will be a winner or earn points. So now let's start. So we have a winner now. The winner is Group 1. Now let's move on to our proper discussions. And now let's discuss about the 4 main types of communication. But first, what is communication? Anyone? Alright. Go ahead. Yes, Miss Lincoln? Very good. Communication, it is a process of exchanging information from sender to receiver and receiver from giving feedbacks. So now, let's move on to the 4 main types of communication. So what are those types of communication? Let's have first verbal communication. So what is verbal communication? Who can read? Go ahead. Juan Luz? Alright. Verbal communication, it is unspoken words to convey messages. It can be formal or informal. It means that we are communicating verbal communication through a use of spoken words like debates and public speaking. So, through this verbal communication, it can be formal or informal. Some examples of formal like debates, meetings, negotiations. Informal like casual chats or gossips. So, let's move on to non-verbal communication. A non-verbal communication, this involves using body language, facial expressions, gestures, and tone of voice to communicate. It often conveys emotions and attitudes that are not explicitly stated. So it means that non-verbal communication, it is a using of body language, hand gestures, so paralinguistics. Proxemics, a distance or close, and facial expressions. So some examples of non-verbal communication, it includes like, for example, you are, when your friend saying like, how are you? Then you just do this, thumbs up. So this is one of the signs of body language that includes non-verbal communication. So now let's move on to written communication. Are you still with B class? Alright, now let's move on to written communication. Written communication, this relies on written words to convey a message. It includes letters, email, reports, and even social media platforms. So it means that here in written communication is very common. Like, for example, you are posting some posts in social media, in your Facebook, Instagrams. So that is one of the examples of written communication. And like also an essay, an emails, or letters. Now let's move on to visual communication. Visual communication, this uses visual elements like images, graphs, charts, and videos to convey a message. So it means that visual communication, we are communicating through a using of sensor of sights, like visuality. So you are simply communicate using charts. It conveys information, graphs, infographics, like that. So those are the four main types of communication which are very important in our everyday life scenario. You know why? Because it allows us to connect with other people. Through a use of this, we are communicating effectively. We are building relationships through professionals and personal lives. So, any questions, class? None? So now, let's move on. What are the barriers in communications? We have physical barriers, and we have also the emotional barriers, the cultural barriers, cognitive barriers, and systematic barriers. Now, let's discuss the physical barriers. So physical barriers, what is physical barriers? Physical barriers, it is a problem that hinders in communication due to physical factors. Like, for example, distractions, isolations, infrastructure limitations like poor internet connectivity, and also the environmental factors like weather, lighting. So let's move on to emotional barriers. It is like a problem that hinders communication due to emotional factors. Like, for example, like towards people, attitudes, emotions rather, and also the personal biases. Some examples of emotional factors class is, for example, the anger issues, depression, anxiety, and fear. So, are you still with me, class? Very good. And now, let's move on to discuss cognitive barriers. A cognitive barriers class, it is a barriers that is rooted in mental process, such as like an understanding, for examples, learning disabilities or learning disorders. So next is we will discuss the cultural barriers. A cultural barriers, it is a barriers that is rooted in differences of values and practices. For example, cultural nuances, traditions, customs, like that. When we also say the systematic barriers, it is a barriers that is rooted from organizations or structures. For example, rigid policies or protocols. So now that are those communication barriers, including the four main types of communication. So do you have still any questions? Just raise your right hand. So no one to ask a question. So let's move on to written essay. So I want you to prepare 1/2 sheet of paper, and the question is, discuss the importance of four main types of communication. So I will give you 5 minutes to to write an essay about the importance of the four main types of communication. Are we clear now, class? Very good. So you may now start. Alright, now class, I want you to group yourselves into two, and you'll create an infographic oration about the differences of the four main types of communication, including their strengths and weaknesses. So, to be submitted on next week. So for your assignment, I want you to research about the topic figurative of speech, and I will call randomly to share what have you written, and please be prepared. So that's all for today, class. Goodbye and thank you.